That night began like so many others in my modest house by the river. However, my son's words still resonate in my memory, soft and firm, like the murmur of a brook in the stillness of the forest. I have kept them deep in my soul ever since. Before we dive into this, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Are you in a quiet town, a bustling metropolis, or somewhere in between? I'd love to know what places host those sharing this story tonight. I'm 58 now, and my days are interwoven with comforting routines and unexpected surprises. That evening started simply enough. The sun had already set behind the hills, painting the backyard a serene violet that filtered through my kitchen window. I was finishing drying the dinner dishes, the warm water still on my fingertips, when I heard the front door creak softly. My son Mateo had arrived from work. He arrived wearing his coat, his hair slightly damp from the mist brought by the sunset. "Hi, Mom," he murmured softly, and I knew instantly something was bothering him. His tone was tender, with pauses that betrayed an invisible burden. Mateo has always been thoughtful, but this time it was different, as if he'd silently rehearsed his words, unsure how to take the first step. I dried my hands on a cloth and turned to him. The kitchen smelled of stewed vegetables and fresh herbs, a scent that reminded us both of those Sunday family dinners when he was a curious child. The warm light from the lamp on the table softened the contours of his face, lessening the rigidity of his jaw and the shadow on his forehead. He sat down without taking off his coat, rubbing his hands together as if searching for strength. At first we chatted about trivial matters, his office routine, a new neighbor in his neighborhood, the basketball game he'd watched on TV. I nodded, responded with brief observations, but inside I sensed a subtle tension, like the silence before a distant storm. He glanced at me, averting his eyes, just like when he was a kid, and confessed a poor grade or a secret affair. Finally, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom," he said, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a while. I didn't know the right time or the right way, but tonight seems right." His words floated in the air, delicate and measured. I felt my breath catch, not from fear, but from the purity of his intention. I pulled out a chair and sat next to him, resting my palm on the oak table between us. The wood grain felt warm beneath my touch, a familiar anchor. "Whatever it is, Mateo, you can tell me anything," I replied. My voice surprised me, firm, but with a sweetness that reminded me of how I used to talk to him when he was little. He looked up, his eyes sparkling in the dim light. "I just want you to know how much you mean to me. Even now, as old as I am, you're the only person I can be myself with, without fear or judgment. I've been dealing with some shadows, and your warmth is what keeps me going." For a moment, time stood still. Outside, a gust rustled the leaves of the old willow tree, and in the distance a dog barked. The world shrank to that kitchen and the words that bound us together. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or an urgent plea. It was something subtler, deeper. A son opening himself to his mother, giving his essence. A warmth filled me, a knot of melancholy and pride intertwined. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her fingers were cold from the night air, but firm, and she didn't move away. We remained that way, palm to palm, and I felt the years, from her childhood until that moment, melt into an eternal bond. We talked for hours afterward in low, measured voices. He told me about his hidden insecurities, about aspirations he'd put off out of fear, about the doubts that plagued him in his solitude. I listened, not rushing to offer advice, simply offering my presence, reminding him that he wasn't alone. In that humble kitchen, beneath the hum of the old refrigerator and the glow of the lamp, we created a refuge of honesty and tenderness. When I walked him to the door later, the mist had turned into a fine drizzle. He hugged me tightly before leaving, and I felt the pulse of his heart against mine. As he closed the door, I stood there for a long time, the echo of his words floating like the scent of wet earth. I didn't know then how this gentle openness would alter the way I saw him and myself. But I sensed a change, a renewed intimacy, a deeper respect, and perhaps the beginning of my own path of rediscovery. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. I made my coffee as usual, but its fragrance seemed more intense, tinged with nostalgia. Mateo's words from the night before accompanied me like a soft echo in every gesture. I sat at the table where we had spoken, running my fingers along the grain of the oak, evoking the warmth of his hand beneath mine. For years I had silently observed him, worried not about specific crises, but about that maternal instinct that drives us to watch over our loved ones, even when they fly alone. I never imagined I would return like this, with my heart in my hand. The whole day passed in a serene haze. I folded laundry, pruned the flowers in the garden, let the radio hum old-fashioned tunes. Everything seemed imbued with a special glow. I remembered Mateo as a child, running along the river path with his backpack slung over his shoulder, his cheeks flushed by the autumn wind. Now he was a man in his own world, and yet he returned to my table for refuge. That afternoon he called me. His voice sounded more confident, but just as gentle. "Mom, do you mind if I stop by tomorrow? There's more I want to share." I immediately agreed, but after hanging up, I stared at my phone. It wasn't anxiety I felt, but a mixture of anticipation and deep gratitude. We were forging something new. A bridge built not out of duty, but out of shared will. The next day dawned gray and cool, the kind that invites you to light a candle and savor the slowness. I prepared a legume broth, letting it simmer slowly until the aroma of carrots and spices permeated the house. When Mateo arrived, he was carrying a sprig of wild lavender. "For you," he said simply, placing it in a glass on the counter. The gesture disarmed me. He had never been one for floral gifts. A torrent of affection coursed through my chest. We dined in silence at first, the clinking of spoons against plates filling the emptiness. Then, as the light faded and the house quieted, Mateo resumed the conversation. He talked about a decision he'd been putting off for months, quitting his steady job to pursue a long-held dream, a craft workshop he'd been passionate about since he was young. "I've been afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of failure, of disappointing others, but above all, of losing myself in the attempt." I listened, leaning slightly toward him. His voice was deep but steady, with a fragility I hadn't seen since his teens. "Mateo," I said softly, "when you were little, you swore you'd be a cartographer. You spent afternoons in the yard with your drawings, inventing routes through imaginary lands. Maybe this is just another map you're drawing now." He smiled slightly, and the stiffness in his shoulders eased. "You've always had that way of seeing everything," he murmured. "It makes me feel like I'm not crazy for trying." "You're not crazy," I assured him. "You're brave, and it's okay to be afraid. Sometimes, fear just signals that you're on the verge of something big." We stayed there long after the broth had cooled, the candle flickering between us. Outside, the streetlight cast soft shadows on the glass. It seemed as if time had stopped to let us breathe. I realized I wasn't just hearing my son. I was also hearing myself, the young woman full of longings and uncertainties, and the one I was now, understanding that growth has no expiration date. When Mateo got up to leave, he held me longer, as if words weren't enough. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "You don't know how much this means." But I did know. I felt it in the silence of the house after his departure, in the quickened beat of my heart, in the tears I let fall unhurriedly. Those nights didn't just help him. They transformed me, revealing to me that I could still be open, receptive, rediscovering my strength in the simple act of listening. And as I turned off the lights and went upstairs, I looked ahead with curiosity, eager for what would come between us, even if I couldn't name it yet. The following days brought an unexpected rhythm, like a river finding a new course. Mateo's visits became weekly beacons, moments when the hustle and bustle of the world, bills, shopping, the constant murmur of everyday life, faded into a blur. They always began calmly. He'd enter with a nod. I'd offer him a smile and a cup of tea, and little by little, the words flowed like a gentle torrent. I was surprised to realize I longed for those evenings almost as much as he did. His company was a balm, a reminder of how alive a connection could beat after decades of life. One stormy night, with the wind whipping against the windows and the garden lights blurred by the rain, I had just put the kettle on when he came in. His expression was thoughtful. He didn't speak immediately. He carefully took off his coat, hanging it up with deliberate precision. I watched him, noting how the rain had stuck strands to his forehead, and a warmth filled my chest. Not ephemeral, but pure presence, attention, trust. "Mom," he finally said, sitting down at the table, "I've been thinking about what you told me the other time, about fear and being on the edge of what's important." His fingers absent-mindedly brushed the rim of the cup. "I've realized that I don't just hold back my dreams. I also avoid feeling everything deeply. The beautiful, the frightening, even the uncertain." I nodded slowly, leaning back in my chair. There was courage in that admission, and my own heart contracted in empathy. "It's hard to give yourself over to life," I responded gently. "We spend so much time worrying about how others see us that we forget what it means to exist only in a moment that belongs to us." He smiled shyly, and the tension in his eyes dissipated. "Exactly, and tonight I wanted to tell you. With you I can be like that, without polishing every sentence or hiding what even I don't understand." His gaze met mine, and in it I saw the child he had been swaddling, the young man I had taught to row in the river, now an adult and naked in his truth. I reached out and covered his hand, like that first night. It was a ritual gesture, an anchor in our shared space. "I feel the same," I confessed. "Being able to speak and be seen without masks is a rare treasure, and I thank you for allowing me into your world." The room quieted. Outside, the rain eased to a soft patter, in tune with the slow pulse of my being. I understood then that this went beyond our filial bond. It was a meeting of souls, two beings recognizing fragility and the courage to share it. There was no awkwardness, only an intimacy that grew from respect and affection. He shifted a little, and I noticed how his voice became almost hesitant. "Mom, sometimes I wonder if I've been too closed off from the world, if fear has ruled my steps too much. But with you, I can say that I don't know everything, and that's okay." "You're not alone in that," I told him tenderly. "No one is, and sometimes, letting someone be with you in your doubt is the boldest act." We talked until well into the early morning, the hours enveloping us like a serene cocoon. I shared forgotten anecdotes, moments of hesitation in my youth, fleeting regrets, lessons learned in the interstices of joy and pain. He listened without judgment, with the patience of someone who truly loves. I realized that those nights didn't just guide him, they brought me back to myself, reminding me of the woman I had been and the one I could still be. When he left, the rain had stopped, leaving the air pure and crisp. I stood on the threshold, watching him walk down the path in quiet admiration. Something had shifted between us again, a deeper trust, a mutual recognition of weakness and strength. I gently closed the door, letting the silence fill the house. As I returned to the kitchen, I felt a tingling inside, a growing certainty that our bond was more than just words, a living, constant presence propelling us toward an indefinite, yet deeply felt horizon. The following week brought a subtle anticipation. I noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed, how the afternoon light gilded the living room, the hum of the appliance, the whisper of the wind in the willows by the river. Every sound, every shadow, seemed charged with meaning, an echo of the conversations that had reshaped my view of Matteo and, in turn, of myself. He arrived that evening with a notebook under his arm and a serene expression. His visits had become fluid, as if we had found an essential rhythm. The smell of freshly baked bread perfumed the kitchen as he poured tea. We sat, steam rising between us, and for a while a complete silence reigned, saturated with complicity. Finally he looked up, his eyes steady and kind. "Mom, I've reflected on what true honesty means and how scarce that space is in life. I wanted to tell you that my fears stem from feeling alone in the face of them, but here, speaking like this, it's me without disguise." I covered his hand with mine, our silent ritual. "It's all the same to me, Matteo," I admitted. "I thought I had to have it all figured out. That doubt was weakness. But you've shown me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but living with it, letting it shape us without dominating us." He smiled, a shy gesture that united the boy I raised with the man he was. "That's what makes these nights special," he said, not just for me, but for both of us. They remind us that we're not defined by fears or past accomplishments, but by the moments when we choose to come together, to be truthful, and to be present. The rain picked up outside, a soft drumming against the glass, and a deep peace settled in the room. The familiar sounds, the hum of the appliance, the scraping of cups, the flickering of the lamp, became comforting in their ordinariness. I realized that life's humble details could hold as much weight as the great milestones, if we paused to look at them. We chatted until the candle burned out, evoking whispered memories, longings, and fears. I told him about my own past hesitations, how I had kept parts of myself to myself out of prudence. He listened with that attentive sweetness, without reproach, just with his being. In his sincerity, I found not only relief for him, but a mirror of my soul, learning again to be bold, to express myself, to feel. As he said goodbye, he paused at the threshold, his hand on the frame. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for these nights. I didn't know how much I needed them. And you." A deep joy coursed through me, born of being understood. "Thank you, Mateo," I replied, "for trusting, for being here, and for letting me walk with you through this." He smiled once more and walked into the night with quiet grace. I closed the door behind him and leaned against the door, listening to the rain, letting the stillness envelop me. The house felt empty and overflowing at the same time, as if it had absorbed the essence of our conversations and was lovingly guarding it. I went to the living room, turned on a dim light, and sat in its soft glow. I reflected on the weeks that had passed, on the subtle but immense shift that had occurred. What began as a dialogue about fears and truths had blossomed into something lasting, a renewal of the understanding that emotional connection, faith, and surrender are gifts we can offer at any age. In that stillness, I learned that growth never ceases. We can always find ourselves again, and sometimes those we love most are the mirrors that reveal our true light. That night, with the rain still whispering against the glass, a gentle peace enveloped me, the kind that comes from knowing that connection, appreciation, and love can silently transform even the simplest existences, weaving a tapestry of hope that endures.